Coogs house. It is never great to see a Houston Cougar men's basketball alumni indicted by the Fed, especially when it kind of also includes the mafia.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, a bonus episode of Locked On Cougs. Today's show brought to you by our buddies over at Mazda. My name is Parker Ainsworth, your host, Houston-born teacher and coach, and all of that jazz. But we got a lot to get into, and what's kind of a smorgasbord feel of things. I want to talk about Damon Jones, Houston Cougar alum, and that indictment that happened kind of out of nowhere on Thursday. I want to spend the second segment talking about the G League and recruiting and what that looks like and my thoughts on that there, and then kind of wrap up with some Big 12 Media Day takeaways after reflecting back on the couple days that were. But first, the story of the day across not just sports, national normal news cycles was that a 34 person list of people, a list of 34 people were indicted by the federal government for a handful, or for really two different cases happening at once. And a handful of those people were tied to professional basketball, including one Houston alumni, Damon Jones. Now, Damon Jones played at Houston in the 90s. I believe started in 1994, finished in 1997, originally from Galveston. And I want to kind of go through the facts as we've got them. I want to stress that this is an indictment. These are theoretically alleged and has not been proven guilty in court of law. All those things at the top here. But Damon Jones, Houston Cougar alumni, was considered to be a face card in a big money poker game for four of the five families, or involving four of the five families of the mafia. And yes, that's the same. Those are the same five families you see in your movies, TV shows, all the same, based on kind of folks. He and Chauncey Billups both are actually, Chauncey Billups is, I guess, also a Big 12 guy, went to Colorado, but Hall of Famer as a player and is currently coaching the Portland Trailblazers. They were both allegedly considered the fish in this scheme, where they were, for the quickest way possible, rigging a poker game and pulling people into this poker game and saying, you play this high stakes poker game, you can play with Chauncey Billups, Damon Jones, etc. Right? And that's probably the more egregious of these two to me, as far as what the allegations are. It's rigging, shuffler, it's card checking, backdoor communication through almost microscopic type of earpieces. It really feels like this is one that it'd be hard to say, like, what do you think you're getting into if there's any real knowledge you're getting into that, right? However, these are alleged allegations. He's been indicted and all that, right? So that's the one set. The other set, though, was interesting because Damon Jones actually is involved in both cases. The other is about passing along insider information to skew bets involving sports betting on basketball. Specifically, sounds like Damon Jones is involved in passing off health information on guys like LeBron James when they were teammates at several different stops, or when he was on a coaching staff that LeBron played on the roster for. And this is the equivalent of insider trading in any industry, right? If a guy has an illness, a bum ankle, a bad night, whatever, players and staff within the program, or within the, I guess, the franchise, the pro level, will hear about that like the morning of. It doesn't hit the news for a couple hours, doesn't hit the sports book so a couple minutes after that, right? And as a person on the inside, you have knowledge of it before it goes public and before the books shift, right? Text messages, and it sounds like it really was that kind of sloppy. Damon Jones and a couple other current pro basketball players. Jonte Porter has been kicked out of the league, but he was a pro player last year. Malik Beasley, Terry Rozier have both been, I guess, the NBA looked into their stuff. They're also being indicted in this one, and they're all facing allegations along the same lines. And I think that what's interesting here is This is the kind of thing that probably has gone on for centuries, not centuries, but decades at this point, right? And Damon Jones is the center of that as well. And it's not great to see a Houston Cougar in either one of these. It's really not great to see one at the only person crossing over in terms of basketball celebrities into both, right? And I should stress, and I think it's worth noting, Damon Jones has kind of made a career since his Houston days of being like available, likable, hardworking. He had a long career from 97 to the 20 teens. I think it was 15 or 16 when he hung it up finally. Um, but as an NBA player, he only had a more than 1 year stop at one place, and that was Cleveland. Everywhere else was just constant 1 year contracts. We got shot over 40%. And what's interesting there is like, he's not the biggest, the strongest, the fastest, the whatever, but especially in his later years, people wanted him around. And since his playing days, he's had a lot of coaching kind of opportunities where it was kind of the same vein where people wanted, we'll call you a shooting consultant, or we're going to bring you in to help with, a pass game or whatever, giving him various titles to get him on the staff because people wanted him around. He's a very likable person. And I don't, because this is still he has not been found guilty of anything at this point. I want to stress like that's still who Damon Jones is. Um, I think that speaks a lot to a lot of things about this. And leaving the J.R. Smith throwing a cup of soup at him when he was on staff at Cleveland aside, I do think most people besides J.R. Smith like him for being Damon Jones. And I think the big thing that this has opened up is a can of worms of people talking about sports gambling. And I fully know I'm in the minority here, right? Everyone jumps to that connection, and I think that it's short-sighted. We don't have information about gambling before it was legal, or sports gambling before it was legal, or just the bookie backdoor kind of stuff and all that of that. But it was all around and it was all happening. And what the professionalization and regulation of sports gambling has done feels like to me is actually cut down on this. I know it's hard to say when like you're facing these federal indictments and these big things, but these are gigantic, secure, well-established databases being used that did not exist before that. And especially in the ways that these cases are unfolding, where it's like letting people know of a player's injury before it hits the public. That was always a thing. And frankly, it's been a thing in college sports. You saw happening in college baseball. I think it was just last spring. You saw it happening with, like, was it Iowa State and Iowa football it was Iowa football last football season. This is not an uncommon to college thing either, right? Where people are using that little bit of inside information they've got, trying to help their buddies make a little extra cash or whatever, right? It's not horribly uncommon, but we're catching it now, so it feels very front face, right? Um, Look, I don't want to go all the way back to baseball and the White Sox 19 whatever, but I do think that it's safe to say that some level of sports gambling, legal, illegal, or otherwise, has happened basically since sports have been happening. And for what it's worth, when there is some form of gambling happening, there's also probably someone trying to get an edge, and that's to be polite. And that has been happening since sports have been happening, right? And I think now we have these ways to set up and catch things that ultimately actually kind of help. Now, is it hard to say it helps when you have 34 people indicted by the federal government? Yes, that's a little awkward. However, I think that we're living in a period right now where like this all just got legitimized in a lot of ways in the last 5 to 10 years, depending on who you ask. And 5 to 10 years from now, once these speed bumps are over, these lumps are passed, where are we at? 15 years now. Because you go back to like Tim Donaghy in the NBA, he gets arrested in 2000, or I believe 2007, he gets arrested. He put on trial, and he pleads guilty to fixing games as a referee, and had some gambling debts he had to pay off, and so he was fixing games as a referee to pay those debts. He was adamant that he was not the only referee involved in that kind of action. And I feel like that was, at this point, almost 20 years ago. And now that we have more regulations, we're saying he's probably right as far as people involved in fixing things. And it comes to basketball because I think basketball is a really easy game to do it in. You miss a box out, that happens. Did it happen on purpose? You miss a jumper, it happens. It happened on purpose, right? You don't see a cutter for a backdoor pass for layup that happen on those kinds of things. Or you miss a defensive rotation, whatever, right? I think that's what happens in basketball more than like football. You also got to like preserve your health at some point, right? Or baseball, you only get a hit if you're really really good 30% of the time anyway, right? Like it's hard to fake that sometimes. I don't know. I just seem to fan the other way on this when people say this is because there's advertisements about sports gambling on that. That doesn't jive with me. It feels like this is actually hearing about a problem that was kind of whispered about for a long, long, long time. Sucks to see a Houston Cougar at the front of it, and really, it just feels counter character what you hear about the guy a lot. I don't know, but we'll see where things unfold, and obviously court cases, convictions, as things that happen. We will talk about more here at Locked on Coogs. But one thing we have to more about that may be happening and changing as well is the recruitment of G League players, apparently, to college basketball teams. Yes, that's a real thing. We'll talk about it in 1 second. But first, this show is brought to you by our buddies over at Mazda, because Mazda gets keeping the game moving forward, just like adding G League guys may be the next big thing. Mazda is always focused on what the future holds. It's about redefining that future. There are moments that do more than just put points on the board, they move crowds, move culture, and keep the game moving forward. Now, moment of the week last week for me on this and moving the game forward is actually a third and short run by Dean Connors against Arizona in the 2-minute drill right before the halftime whistle sounded. The run itself was not spectacular or immaculate. It got a couple yards on third and one and change. But what it did do was it went from going for a 3-point field goal before the half. Houston only scored a touchdown a couple plays later. That's a 4-point play, and that is moving the game forward. When you know it moves you, unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Park Rangers locked on Cougs here, and Houston is getting in a game that feels counterintuitive. And I want to talk through what I can tell about this. But Abdullah Ahmed is a G leaguer that plays for the Westchester Knicks. He's an international guy. He's currently getting 5.4 rebounds, but 3 blocks per game. And pending NCAA approval, he'll get 2 years of NCAA eligibility. And Houston is a front runner to land him. Now, there's a lot of questions on how this is even possible. I want to talk about that for a second. Talk about Kelvin's comments for at Media Days and kind of try and connect all of it. So, G League salaries for guys that have not made an NBA tie. That means you don't have a two-way contract, haven't signed a bunch of 10 days, you don't have an NBA affiliation, you were just in the G League. G League salaries are actually really low. I think the average I saw was just over $40,000 a year, which I would take to play basketball. I don't mean to say that that's not like real money to some people. I will say that 40 to 40 $40,000 a year for like 6 or 8 months of work is significantly less than what some guys make in NIL money, right? Let's just be real, it is. And what the NCAA is ruling on these G League cases is that guys that have not been drafted, that have not gone through the draft process, that have not sniffed the NBA and are 18, 19 years old, even though they played G League basketball, that is the equivalent of having played like pro basketball in Spain or pro basketball in Serbia or pro basketball in China, wherever you're native, if an international guy, especially your native country. And what they're specifically ruling is that if we allow people to play Spanish men's league, because that's the highest level of basketball they can play in Spain at 16, 17, 18, and then come to the United States at 19 and play college basketball, they're making more money playing in Spain, and it's a much more professional feel in that sense than a guy playing in the G League here. Further, these guys have not attempted to play college basketball yet, especially not in Ahmed's case. These guys have not been drafted or gone through the draft process. They have not sniffed the NBA in that sense either. And that's an interesting intersect here. The biggest, I think, push for this was that G League Ignite experiment that started and ended kind of in the last 6 years. However, this case of playing for the Westchester Knicks is also a little bit different. So Houston's in the lead for this guy, and whatever your thoughts on the idea of a G League guy playing, I guess aside, uh, I think we actually kind of heard from Kelvin this week about this, and it's interesting. At media day, he made the comment that he was, I believe he said, talking to Tom Izzo, coaching friend of his, right, about this deal where G League guys can sign. Louisville just signed one, right? G League guys playing college basketball, and Izzo was confused, and Kelvin was confused, and he went to talk to Kellen, his son, who lead recruits on a lot of their big time recruits, and I was like, Kellen, what do you know about this? And Kellen was like, oh yeah, that's legal. And Kelvin's like, what? He goes, yeah, we're recruiting one. And that was kind of when Kelvin told the world that even though he's very much entrenched in the old school mentality and all those kinds of things, this program is moving forward. And if this is the way basketball is going, this is the way the Houston Cougars are going to go too, right? Now, he did point out that his biggest job is he coaches the team. He helps with recruiting. He tells kids what the program is about. He shows the program to the recruits and all that. But ultimately, his job is a coach who shows up, and it's a lot of his staff and helpers that help make sure kids show up. Kellen being a big part of that, right? And Houston is a part of this and a part of looking forward in basketball. Kelvin's remarks on education, and how college basketball is becoming transactional, all of that does play a role here. And I think a lot of people are trying to dunk on Houston by saying this is hypocritical because within hours of saying the game has gotten too transactional, you had this story leak about Houston being the lead for a G League guy coming down to play. I hear that, and my rebut is that if this is about getting a degree to kids, right? These are kids that haven't gone out and tried to get a degree yet. It's no different in the way it's legally being laid out than going to Barcelona and picking up a kid that plays for FC Barcelona basketball program and says, hey, would you want to come play and get a degree at the University of Houston? The difference is you don't have to fly to Barcelona for this one. This is in Westchester County, right? And I think that is you're still extending that educational invitation theoretically, right? And I think the thing that's rubbing people the wrong way is to this point, whether they're 18, 19, 20 years old or whatever, these kids feel like they've made a decision to not be on the educational side of it. And I don't I I don't often agree with like the legal system that this is a moment where it feels like okay, but the comparison is apt, right? Because those kids in Spain that played professionally in Spain also did not like come to American prep schools and go to the American college system that way. They made money in Europe. And so I kind of think that there's something to be said about all that. I will say, as far as the basketball player goes, if Houston, if and when, if what all that, if Houston signs him, looks like he'll be eligible to play next year. I don't think he'll be able to play on this year's team. 6'1", 220, 3 blocks per game, long arms. 6'10", notes, handwriting. 6'10", 220, 3 blocks per game, long arms. Feels very Houston in a lot of ways. Not a big offensive output kind of guy. He'll dunk it if he gets inside of 4 feet. Otherwise, he's not looking to score. I think that will be a good ad for Houston that way, especially when next year's team you're looking at losing potentially JoJo to the draft, potentially Sanak to the draft. Khalifa Sacco is a fifth-year guy, I believe. You've got holes to plug next year in the big man room theoretically. So you're bringing in guys to help bolster the depth of that room. Now, all of that said, and maybe JoJo Tucker doesn't go to the draft next year. I don't know, right? But maybe Chris Nack doesn't just do the one and done thing. I don't know, but you're preparing for if something like that happens. Always got to be prepared. 6'10", 3 blocks per game, good motor. Hard to be more prepared or more Houston Cougar-like, frankly, than that. Now, last thing here, I'm going to wrap up with some thoughts on Big 12 media days. Speaking of quotes from Sampson from Big 12 media days, and how, first of all, cool experience, and I'll probably talk about that a little bit. But before we get into all of that, I do want to remind you guys that today's show is brought to you by our buddies over at DoorDash, because it is almost weekend. And if you look back at last week's MVP, looking at who delivered, powered by DoorDash, just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash streaks, save more every time you order. These players deliver more when it matters most. To break down the DoorDash Deliver Man, the MVP is Connor Weigman, through the air with its legs, controlling the game, controlling the pace. 2-minute drill, 6-minute score, big 9-minute drive, whatever the case may be. Big Wig got it done. No hesitation of delay. If you've been watching week after week, you know that the performance was not a fluke. Connor Weigman is on a streak of good football games. It's coming back from his injury. And just like Connor Weigman delivered for the Houston Cougars, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays with DoorDash streaks. You save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season long. You can save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Turn to apply. Promo goes through November 18th. Today's show is also brought to you by our buddies over at FanDuel. NFL season's here in FanDuel. Make sure you don't want to miss it. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, get $300 back in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet to put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use across this app. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Park Ainsworth locked on Coogs here. And I don't have a whole lot of scheduled things here for this one, but I do want to talk about just some final thoughts after Big 12 Basketball Media Day, because I do think that, for lack of a better phrase or understanding, people were coming into the season with a lot of questions about Houston. What's Houston going to look like? How does Houston respond to the gut punch that was last season? All of that, right? And to be fair, I think if you don't know a lot about the program, those are all valid questions. And honestly, having gone so long since we've seen a Houston Cougar basketball game, I was kind of starting to creep in that direction too. Like, well, okay, like, where do these freshmen fit in? What is it starting lineup like? Who plays where? Right? All of that kind of stuff. And look, I think I mostly left the 3 days being like, oh, we know who this program is. Kelvin was really quick throughout the entire ordeal. Lots of questions, including one for myself that he probably thought was dumb, but I thought it was all right, about the freshmen, about the young guys, because this is such a star-studded freshman class. You got 3 guys inside the top 20. Bryce Jackson was one of the best players in the city last year, and the 3 national guys as well. It's really a strong group, and everyone wanted to know about them because that's like the sexy thing to do, is talk about the new. And he was like, very bluntly, those are not my 3 best players. Those might be my like 5th and 6th options to score. And everyone just kind of like paused. He was like, I've got Miles Suzanne, who's been in Big 12 4 years. Got Emmanuel Sharp, been in this program for 4 years. JoJo Tug was the Defensive Player of the Year in this conference last year. JoJo Tug, since then, in the last 48 hours, whatever, has also gotten a preseason CBS Defensive Player of the Year nod, right? And he's like, those are my best players. We start there. We work from there. And it's easy to get caught in the new glitz and glam. And I think that all of the freshmen, Bryce Jackson, Kingston Fleming, Isaiah Harwell, Chris Neck, and for what it's worth, Chase McCarty, Mercy Miller, who are registered freshmen and sophomore respectively, they're going to be really good. And I think they're going to be really good for Houston over the course of this year. But Sampson's right. In the final moments of a game last year, they went to Juwan Roberts, right? The veteran of all veterans. This year, in the final moments of a close game, they're going to Milos. They're going to Emmanuel. They're going to JoJo, or defensively, hopefully. And that's where this is going to be. And that's so much more of a known quantity. You just start breathing better afterward. Right? We're back. We know we are, right? Now, I will say, with Milos, Ramon Walker, Emmanuel Sharp sitting there, all seniors, tap their eligibility out. I was sitting like, oh, wait a second. Do I have more questions about next year's team all of a sudden? No, we may figure those out over the course of the season with what underclassmen or juniors, whatever, step up in their roles. Um, Coach didn't say this, but I thought about it after the fact. Um, with all these questions about starting lineups and who starts where and who plays where and who does what, it's really easy to forget that this time a year ago, Big 12 Defensive Player of the Year JoJo Tugler was not in Houston's starting lineup. Javier Francis was. And based on roles and playing with different guys and Miles using a not Jamal Shed or whatever, the team kind of needed more of a JoJo guy at center. And they had kind of this first few weeks where you couldn't, especially with JVR's injury, you couldn't figure out what was going on. And very quickly, it was just like, hey, we got to go JoJo starting now. Like we're just better when he starts. And then suddenly, there's a couple weeks of JV Francis, figuring it out, coming off the bench. And then I'd argue his energy off the bench was a big reason you made it to the NCAA championship game. And frankly, if that final 65 seconds goes any number of different ways, he had some of the biggest plays of that game. And he flourished in that six-man role, flourished in that first big off the bench role. And I think that you'll probably see, I don't know who it will be. I don't know if it'll be who starts between Isaiah Harwell and Mercy Miller and Chase McCarty. I don't know if it'll be who starts between, I don't know. I can go down a long list, the whole roster, I guess. I don't know who it'll be. But I do know that they'll figure it out. They may take some lumps in November and December, and that's fine. Last year's team was 4-3 at one point. Last year's team also lost to Ole Miss in a secret scrimmage that quote unquote happened. This year's team lost to Ole Miss in a secret scrimmage that quote unquote happened. And Kelvin was quick to point out, I played 13 guys. When was the last time you saw Kelvin Sampson play 13 guys on a 20-minute stretch? I think that's just the perspective and the wisdom that he carries. It was interesting too. Obviously, we're in awe of Kelvin. We both like what he does a lot, right? I like what he does a lot. You're at least here listening to me talk about what he does a lot. So thank you for that. Hit subscribe. What Drake said, we keep our jobs that way. Hit subscribe. And shouts to listener Paul. I think it's Paul in North Carolina was a listener I heard about the other day with some cool connections. Shouts to listener Paul, the golfer in North Carolina. I will though say, as much respect as you and I have for Kelvin, and I really think he's the kind of guy like a statue outside of Fertitta feels insufficient, and it'll go up one day and all that, right? With all that respect, the respect and deference from everyone else, the other 15 fan bases worth of media, the national media folks, the other coaches, the other player. Kelvin, look, he's a really smart guy. He's not like some 6'8" giant. But when he walks in a room, a basketball specific room, the mood changes. And it was fascinating to see that. And again, people have been to media days every year with Kelvin and probably saying it differently and have seen that every year, whatever. But I'd only seen him around us, Houston folks. Seeing him around this situation with national writers and other schools and other players, some of which Cole Pete had Houston in his top 5. He's there representing Arizona as a freshman. Right? Guys that he knew fairly well. The mood was like, oh, Kelvin's here. And everyone just was like watching and looking. And the coaches panel, the 7 other coaches on that, like they all wanted to stare at Kelvin while he was talking. And they don't do that for everyone. And I think that's just an interesting thing to keep perspective on. Look, he's built this thing up, and like we all talk about it a lot, but he's just it takes a special person to do that. And he's been a special person for that, and hoping to cut down some nets with him in April, and that'd be a big deal. Anyway, today's been Locked On Cougs bonus episode. We've gone like an hour between 2 episodes today. So plenty to get into the weekend. We'll be live after the Arizona State game as well Saturday night. So make sure you subscribe, hit the bell so you know when we're going live. Locked On Cougs, primarily Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Cougs.